And this is the reason why I think the libertarians, you guys could have been that threat. But if this happens, and this is my fear, is that the Trumpers will create their own party and basically call it the Trump Party, because it's all centered on him, and that they will get a large amount of the votes. And if they win, and if they persuade the members of like the Democrats, Republicans to join them and basically say, hey, we want a real new world, a real government, a real, a change. This could be a big problem down the road. Of course.
What is up, everybody? My name is Kyle Matovcik. I am the host of the In Liberty and Health podcast, where we talk all things liberty, health, and wellness, and beyond. My hope is to encourage and spread the message of liberty and physical and mental well-being. I hope you enjoy all the topics we talk about with our guests. We're on all major streaming platforms, so please sit back, relax, and enjoy.
Man, I'm doing as good as anyone can do getting buried by his 13-year-old son on leg day.
I'm not going to apologize for not being on this podcast because I got to go see Metallica. So if that's a problem, kiss my ass. Okay? All right.
All right, everybody, this is In Liberty and Health, and today I've been looking forward to this conversation for a very long time. He is a very well-educated gentleman. I have Adam Fitzgerald with me. Adam, how you doing, man?
Hey, Kyle, thanks for having me on, man.
Of course. Well, I'm very happy to have you here, and we were shooting the shit off air, talking about music and everything under the sun already, so I can already tell this could be a good conversation. So real quick, give everybody a brief introduction to yourself in case they don't know who you are.
Well, I'm just Adam Fitzgerald. I'm just an independent researcher in the events of September 11, 2001, and I study various areas relating to it, like foreign policy, Middle East foreign policy, Middle East culture, radical fundamentalism, the history of the intelligence agencies, and other areas. I do, other people don't realize that I also do studies into Jonestown and La Cosa Nostra. I think I have more books on La Cosa Nostra than any other subject. That's because I'm from New York and I grew up around those people. So it did interest me for a while. But yeah, 9/11 is my primarily area of study, only because, from 2006 onward, I studied 9/11 because I was in New York when it happened at the time, and I really didn't know anything about it. And, I'm terrible in physics, so I don't care about how the towers fell, and that was the predominant conversation. I wanted to know who these people were and why they attacked us, and, the history behind these people. And I had no idea. It would take me 16 years forward to the day, and I'm still learning about, the motivations and the pre-intelligence history behind it. And it seems that there is no end, because each year you get to learn something new that you haven't had before. And with all the millions of documents and files and documents that are stored away at the National Archives, we are just touching the tip of the iceberg here.
Yeah, well, that's one thing else that I admire about you, is that you're always kind of open to learning, and that you're very open and honest about what you do know and what you don't know. So I kind of want to throw this at you, because I was thinking about this leading up to this conversation, is what do you think's missing from the libertarian perspective on 9/11? Because I think if you ask most libertarians, what they're going to give you in terms of 9/11 is that the reason why we were attacked is because of blowback, right? So, we've been terrorizing the Middle East for years and years and years. And then finally they got fed up with it. And also, sending money to Israel and, kind of being hawkish on Iran and all that other kind of stuff there. So that's the reason why they attacked us. What do you think's missing from that narrative?
I don't think there's much missing at all. In fact, libertarians generally, and I'm new to the genre itself, the past 2 years, that they are well ahead than, say, any other political paradigm. So, in other words, throughout the last 15 years, I've been studying the events. Most people generally are very ignorant regarding the events of September 11, 2001. And that's because early on, conspiracy theories, I'm talking about fringe conspiracy theories here, have been at the forefront of viral media. And this led to millions of people being manipulated or disenfranchised by the many competing fringe theories. Meanwhile, the very few people that are out there giving, prima facie evidence for, hey, that there was, inside job, I hate using that term, but that they're like, again, like shadow banned in the real world because of all the amount of Alex Jones, Jim Fetzer type S conspiracy theories are out there. But libertarians that I've seen in the last 2 years have been well ahead of the ball. And that's because they themselves are very skeptical of the federal government anyway, but they're also skeptical of any competing narratives without fact checking. And that's a big issue within the 9/11 sphere. And you'll notice it's not just 9/11, it's just about with every human event. And I think that's the case, is that if you have any huge event in history, you'll be met with disinformation first. They don't need to kill you. The CIA doesn't need to kill you right away. All they need to do is push one or two people to push, a really fringe theory that doesn't make sense. And most people don't have the time to read and fact check and just believe whatever conspiracy that they believe if it comes from a semi-authoritative person. I think with libertarians in general, what helps them is that they're very critical and open to listening to competing narratives, but with a very skeptical ear. And that's what brought me to attention to Reed Coverdale and Dave Smith, for example, and other people as well. But it was Reed Coverdale I ran into first, and it was through a post that he made, I think, two or 3 years ago about the Pentagon. And I chimed in, and, he had me on the show. And that's the reason why I have like 2,500 people following me on my channel, which I'm shocked that anybody even follows me, because I'm very low key and not very entertaining at all. I'm very dry-witted, and one thing I'm very strict when it comes to like falsehoods, and I that's the one thing I think I need to work on, is I'm just too anal and too strict, and it leads into like I'm quick with the ban button, and I don't have time, because I think what we need now, especially the libertarian community, is that they are right there, but what they need to do is basically get rid of the domestic issues that divide them further and come on the Ron Paul type of argument of anti-war, which will unify everybody. And I think at this day and age, what we need is a competing third party that threatens the establishment. And they are threatened, believe it or not. They know who you are. They just, they don't take you seriously because of the infighting, and that you are not as financially powerful as them, but you are a threat, and they do take notice. So the libertarians themselves have an opportunity to threaten the establishment. They just need to get more organized.
Yeah, I think that's totally a fair criticism. And I find myself beside most of the antiwar.com, Libertarian Institute, guys like that, and obviously Reed as well. And Reed has been responsible for boosting me as well, and I can't sing his praises enough. He was actually he stayed at my house on his way back to New Hampshire, so that was pretty cool. But yeah, like it seems like there is even a divide amongst some of the foreign policy stuff within the libertarian perspective, where our mutual friends, Dave DeCamp, Pat McFarlane, Reed, and some of the anti-war guys, Cal Angelo and Connor Freeman, we're all of the mind of we need to be extremely skeptical of a lot of the China propaganda right now. And another thing that I wanted to talk to you about today was kind of like some of your knowledge around that and the populist right, because there's a lot of similarities between the populist right and libertarians, and I get it and I see why, but perhaps I'm maybe too critical at times. But I'm very skeptical of them because they're good on a lot of issues. But when it comes to this China issue, they're very bad. They're very, very bad on this. So the one thing I've dug into a lot is the connection between Steve Bannon and Miles Guo, who's this exiled CCP billionaire, if you're familiar with him. And to me, it seems like there's an extreme conflict of interest between the populist right and their anti-China rhetoric, because you have somebody like Steve Bannon, who in my mind is financially compromised by somebody who's exiled from the CCP and defrauded people in China in order to line his own pockets. So therefore, of course, if you have this guy that's bankrolling you who hates China and defrauded people in China, then of course you want regime change and war there to help wash your hands of it. So I know it's a long tangent and that's a little bit of a theory, but there's a lot of evidence to what I'm saying, and I just haven't been able to compile all of it up. So I know I threw a lot at you, but any thoughts?
No, and look, there's a battle of wars here between Democrats and Republicans. Democrats obviously see Russia as the threat, whereas Republicans see China or Iran as the threat. And this has been going on for quite some time, even during the Reagan administration, where we had, the Cold War throughout the 1950s and 60s that extended into the late 80s until that got replaced with the invasion of Afghanistan by the Soviets in 1979. When the Soviets fell, they needed a new enemy, and that was the Mujahideen. And then they created that enemy and facilitated that enemy on the purpose of defeating an enemy itself. This lends to the old adage, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Now, with the Mujahideen and the Arab fundamentalist threat distinguished, no longer can be a threat, we have to invade, or we have to invite a new enemy. Why not go back to an enemy that has always been the case, and that is the Cold War revisitation of China and Russia. Steve Bannon, as you said, has been a long proponent of the Chinese rhetoric. I think of the Trump administration basically stood out as the primary reason for this rhetoric here far right. I think it's we can bring up people like Matt Gaetz and Marjorie Taylor Greene and the rest of them, who basically are very critical. And I'm talking about really openly critical about the Democrats, and rightfully so.
Right.
But this comes at a very convenient time, because while they criticize the Democratic establishment for their continual billions and billions of dollars of funding in Ukraine, at the same time, these are people that are just jealous because they would like that money to go toward an instigation of the military invasion of China or Iran, either one. They would like to have both, and that's because they too are part of that military industrial complex narrative. When how many stakes and shares they have with companies like LMNT Technologies or Raytheon or Boeing. I would say that if you look at their backgrounds, it's probably a percentage of each of those people in Congress. That's the reason why. That's how they get paid. They don't get paid through the merry, minor donations of the average American public. Where are they going to get that money from? We're basically under the poverty level of the majority of the country is. So basically, our interests are never going to get. Real money comes from private military industrialists, private industrialists in the public sector, and of course, large-scale corporations. So when you have this duopoly of competing criticisms, say left and right, I'm always saying that, and I always talk about the wire media, the chance I get, is that they're very hypocritical, because these are the same people that want a conflict, but at a different geographical location.
Oh, your audio is blurring out a little bit, Adam. I'm sorry.
So I think what worries me more is that there is a hidden component within the conservative movement. And I'm not talking about the traditionalists. I'm talking about this very quasi-religious small group of people that, unlike the Democrats, who are very disorganized, who are very organized, but have a very almost a very anti-religious sentiment, if I could say. They're not very religious. They're more anarchist and atheist than secularist than their brotherhoods over on the right. But there's a small component within this group, and they're the Trumpers, I would like to call them, and that they use the religion of Christianity as a tool. And these are people who are not biblically literate. They're almost similar to that of the like the Arab fundamentalists who are illiterate. These are people that don't read the Quran, and they're persuaded by their imams. Well, I would like to say that, and I'm daring to say it, but I will say it, that people like Matt Gaetz and Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert and those ilk are not biblically literate either. And these are people that follow the works of like John Hagee and Benny Hinn and Kenneth Copeland. And if you ever listen to those people and the rhetoric that they pose, they are almost daring for the world to end, because they would like to see the the literal translation of Revelations come to fruition, and that is the last battle in Armageddon in Megiddo, it's called, and that's all the armies of the world brings about the rise of Christ and the second coming. So I'm a little bit worried about these people because they're willing to use nuclear weapons more so to achieve this quasi-religious goal. On the other hand, you can make a great argument that the Democrats are inviting a nuclear war by instigating the biggest bear besides ourselves regarding nuclear stockpiled weapons, and that's Russia. And
Right.
only Russia. I think Russia has more than us. I don't quote me on it. It's either us or them who have the most nuclear weapons on the face of the earth. Either way, it would invite the end of the world. And that not through any religious means, but through their own selfish political reasons. But ignorance, is quite a universal drug, it seems, and that this is the reason why I'm more in line with, like you, with the anti-war libertarian community about spreading that message and hoping to persuade some of those people of the left and right to come on over and say enough of this.
Yeah, and it's been hard for me because I mean I've pissed off quite a few people who are of the Republican, even like libertarian Republican ilk, because I'm not willing to give an inch on this issue because I'm sure you know much more than I do about this, but I mean the military buildup against China has been something that's been very, very pronounced, and a lot of these Republicans. I'm going to sound rude when I say this, but they're idiots. They're complete and total ignoramuses when it comes to Biden's policy on China, because they're under this they're under this impression that, yes, they had shady business dealings with China, but that doesn't mean they're owned by China, right? Because if they were owned by China, Kamala Harris wouldn't go to the Philippines and say, we'll go to war with China over a conflict in the sea, or we're going to arm Taiwan, and repeatedly say, if China goes for Taiwan, then we will defend them. And it's funny because Reed and I both kind of say this a lot, is that like Donald Trump and Joe Biden are two very, very similar candidates. Like people think they're very, very far apart, but really they don't disagree on much. It's just like rhetorical differences, and Trump is a much more passionate speaker, but really on the issues I'm having a hard time thinking right now where they really disagree, other than maybe maybe like domestic policy surrounding gas. That's about the difference between the two, but their rhetoric's different. But the only problem is just that Biden's on this team, Trump's on this team, and we have to make sure that it's our team that wins at all costs, no matter what. We never assess the candidates on the individual issues. We just assess the team that they're on, and if they're on our team, then by all means we'll pull the lever for them.
No, and you hit the nail on the head, and I think this is the biggest glaring issue that affects all of us here in the United States, is that when it comes to domestic issues, there is a very defining line between the Democrats and Republicans. They'll argue over healthcare. They'll argue over education. They'll argue over tax breaks for the poor and for the middle class. They'll argue over all these issues that affect all of us as a whole. But on the other hand, when it comes to the more global issues outside the United States, there is no dividing line. Right. And that is the most glaring issue here that's often ignored, especially through the legacy media, which is, one giant trunch of misinformation to begin with. But for the independent media that's still out there, they're trying to show you that, hey, that the domestic issues revolving both the left and right political paradigm is nothing but a ruse. It's only meant to divide the United States from acting as a whole unit. And this is something that I tend to talk about sometimes, and you'll see me on Twitter, declaring that nobody should vote or something like that along those lines. I'm not saying that off the cuff. I really mean it. And that is because when it comes to the global issues that you raised there, Kyle, is that when it comes to, say, Israel or Saudi Arabia or a war somewhere overseas, there is no real difference between the Democrats and Republicans. That's because they serve bigger interests than the American people, and that's where the money comes from. The Pentagon, for example, the private corporations that are global around the world, people don't realize that Walmart's, one of the biggest, most powerful conglomerates on the face of the earth. The Walton family are billionaires beyond recompense. And, they have a lot of foreign policy influences as well. Mega churches, for example, believe it or not, they're one of the most private, influential entities on the face of the earth. But people don't realize how powerful these people are and how much money they give to these congressmen and women. But when it comes to foreign lobbyists, especially from Israel or Saudi Arabia, the Gulf, like Bahrain, United Arab Emirates, they pose a greater danger to the American people because their interests are basically interests of conflict. And that means that people are mortality issues. And usually they use the United States because they have a much bigger military than both of those countries combined. So they're basically using the United States by giving whatever money that they could. And now Israel is a very poor country, as opposed to Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia has to pour in billions of dollars. Why? Because one, we share nothing in common with Saudi Arabia. They're built upon the principles of what is called Wahhabism. And that is a very perverted definition of a branch of Islam in Sunni Islam. And it is not believed by 95% or 96% of Muslims around the world. It created the groups like Al-Qaeda and Islamic State and what have you through Saudi money. On the other hand, you have Israel, who basically gives very little money, but has a wider broad of influential organizations like J Street, the Zionist Organization of America, that heavily influences not just the political sphere of this country, but also in the university sphere, in the educational sphere, in the corporation sphere. They go out and have people do polls or spy on people about what the perceived general opinion about Israel is, and then they go back and give that general opinion and try to dissent and squash, much like Scientology does, where they go on the offensive as a defensive measure and quash any type of criticism whatsoever by either calling them anti-Semites or just, if they're Jewish and they outspoken, they call them self-hating Jews. And this is, the Johnny-come-lately tactic that is losing its luster. And I think Israel knows it. So basically, you have two foreign policy paradigms here that are heavily influenced in the United States, which leads to the Democrat and Republicans having basically no dissenting opinion when it comes to those issues. But they are meant to have opposing issues domestically not because they care about you, but because it keeps you divided and angry within each other because you voted for the left or right.
Yeah. So, what's funny is when you brought up the whole anti-Semite deal, I see some even libertarians pointing towards Kanye West as somebody to be admired. But I think I see some people saying, oh, he's a CIA asset that's basically out there to divide the right. And that seems kind of silly to me. But what I think is that he's just a cultural figure who came out and had a bad experience with a certain group of people. And he's blaming everything that went wrong in his life on that specific group of people. And by, the consequence of that now is people like you and I who are saying that the Israeli government is extremely bad. And we never mention, the Jewish people. Now we get lumped in with Kanye West for our legitimate criticisms of a government that has a huge hand in the way that, our state, our country here is governed. When you have someone like Kanye West, then once again, now we're just lumped in with him. And now they just say, oh, well, you're just anti-Semitic because you believe what Kanye believes, right? You believe Jews are conquering the world and they control everything. Well, there's grains of truth in this, but when you just come out and say that you're going to go DEFCON 3 on the Jewish people, well, now you just look ridiculous. It's kind of just, it's like the Alex Jones, make it a tar baby of everything. So that way, everything that goes near it is just toxic waste too.
This is the primary reason why, I made a video regarding that interview with Kanye West and Alex Jones is that, here's a great big issue that the American people should entertain.
Right.
And yet it's being promoted by the worst of worst, the godfather of all disinformation, next to the legacy media, is Alex Jones.
Mhm.
And the only bad thing about this is that Alex Jones has a very big platform. It's tremendous.
Yeah.
And he reaches a lot of people. He's been around for 20, 25 years.
Yeah, but he's been shadow banned, Adam. Nobody's supposed to hear him, right? He's just a fringe conspiracy theorist. That's what they all say. But we know that. I'm sorry to interrupt, but
No.
It just drives me nuts because he clearly has an enormous reach, and people act like he's just this fringe activist that like nobody's heard of. No, he's pretty much a mainstream kind of guy that puts out a lot of bad info, and people just gravitate towards it. So I put out this tweet saying that there's a grift to be pro-vaccine and a grift to be anti-vaccine. And someone said, "Oh, one grift's more lucrative." Yes, you're right. But on top, they acted like there's no such thing as someone that's just putting out misinformation about, the injection to kind of smear and dirty the water. So I'm sorry to interrupt, but just when I seen you talking about that, it really resonated with me, and it's something that I try to tell people who just say, "Oh, the jab is population control." I'm like, you realize this is exactly what they want. They want a tar baby around this subject, so that way all the legitimate grievances are not heard, and they can just do whatever they want because they can say, "Oh, you're just being Alex Jones, so we can dismiss you. You're not a reasonable person."
Yeah, look, you just hit the nail on the head with that. And look, yeah, that's the reason why you have the very rational voices you won't hear on viral media at all. And this is something that really grinds my gears, and that's why I'm very strict when it comes to conspiracy theories or someone posting from Natural News or some other really whacked up conspiracy site, and that I have no time for that because we're at a war for information. And this is something I've noted a couple of times, is that with 9/11, we're fighting a battle of two fronts. One is a war for information by the federal government, and one is a war of disinformation. Well, that could be applied here with COVID, Kyle. Is that we're fighting a war for information about what's going on with Pfizer and Moderna and why the vaccines are not 100%, so to say. Also, the battle of disinformation, which seems to be coming from all over the place, from the left and right mainstream, and people like yourself are left in the battlegrounds, and then you're criticized highly by both sides, and you feel the squeeze until you join a side. Well, good for you that you haven't done that and you kept your reputation intact, because a reputation takes a lifetime to build and only seconds to destroy. And this is the reason why I'm not going to sell out to any left and right paradigm just because they may say something right against, the perceived enemy. But, I'm going to continue, be dry and very, unentertaining as to be, because there's nothing funny and there's nothing entertaining about what is happening in the current paradigm of the United States right now. And we need more level-headedness, because these are the people that we're going to have to look up to and promote, because without that, you're left with nothing but disinformation and misinformation, which would lead to the demise of this country. I think with with Alex Jones, if we could, just talk about that for a bit, I hate to give this guy any type of attention, and I hate him more than any other person. Besides like Henry Kissinger or Dick Cheney, for example. But Alex Jones, what he does is terribly, I think overall what he does is probably just as bad, is that he creates generations and generations, that's no exaggeration, because his platform is huge, generations of people, of misinformed people, where they espouse those falsehoods to the next generation of over. And what this does is basically, he's no different than the CIA, for example, is that he'll promote false information. Now, yes, he'll say something right. He'll say that is, oh, by the way, there was an inside job at Sandy Hook, or there's an inside job with 9/11. Yeah, all right, to an extent. But when he goes into details and those specifics are wrong and he's called out on them, people rush to his defense, say, hey, at least he's taking against the establishment. Well, no. He's no different than the establishment, in the effect that the establishment wants you, the American viewer to be misinformed, disinformed, and promulgate those misinformations and misinformations to the next person, so that the real conspiracies, the ones that are, out in the public, are never brought to light.
I am stoked to tell you guys about the show's new sponsor. I am now working with MTS Nutrition, which is a brand that I've believed in for a very long time, and they run awesome sales and they have awesome products. So I want to tell you about their amazing protein powder, which you're going to ask me how many pounds I have of the protein powder, and the answer is all of them. So here I got Red Velvet Cake, 25 grams of protein, and they have the amino acids and everything on there, 59 servings. Peanut butter fluff, fluffernutter, 26 grams of protein, and then also the chocolate chip cookie, which literally has real pieces of chocolate chip cookie in there. So 27 grams of protein, 180 calories. As I've talked about on the show, getting your protein in is very, very important, so make sure you hit that link below and purchase your protein powder through MTS Nutrition. Boom!
Because it would show that, hey, wait a minute, maybe the CIA was involved with the 9/11 attacks. Or that maybe the Israeli Mossad, through the intelligence agencies, knew something and did more in the United States, same with the Saudis. But you won't hear of it because everybody wants to scream that there are no planes or no hijackers, which is far more entertaining than, say, the history of the pre-intelligence aspect involving 9/11, which is very broad, which is very boring, but it is the truth.
Yeah, and it could be because I come from a background of like nutrition information, that when I started kind of digging into the conspiracy stuff, that I was very, very skeptical of all claims, because I don't want to touch on my diet history. I've covered that on plenty of podcasts before, but I did the carnivore diet for 2 years because I was given bad information, right? Carbohydrates are evil. They're going to make you fat. And if you have so much as a strawberry, then you're going to gain 22 pounds. Now, obviously I'm being a bit hyperbolic, but basically, people will take mechanistic studies when it comes to nutrition stuff, and then they'll extrapolate that out. So like, if I told you right now there's cyanide in apples and almonds, don't eat them, right? Well, the problem is that statement's true, but it's the dosage that makes the poison. You would have to eat 500 raw almonds to get a lethal dose of cyanide. I don't know about you, but I don't know anybody that sits down and eats 500 raw almonds. But this is kind of the same situation when it comes to the political stuff and even stuff regarding the treatment. People will, like, the data's out there. This is harming people. I reference studies all the time, but then you get people who just won't link to any studies, and they'll just say the most obscene, zoomed out conspiracy theory about something and say that this is the truth and that you're an idiot if you don't agree with me in this regard. So like, when it came to the vaccine, people are saying, oh, this population control. They're talking about the spike protein. I'm like, look, I'm a health nut. I don't fucking know what a spike protein is. I'm not a vaccinologist, but I can read the data and tell you that in younger people, okay, it looks like there is some harm being done. Older people, I can't find any data that's really suggesting that it's causing older people any harm. And once again, for both sides, I get attacked, but I'm not going to just say inflammatory stuff just to get clicks. That's not who I am, because I want people, much like you, to be informed and have the truth going forward. So that way we're not just considered Alex Jones or these people who just purvey awful information, because like you said, it literally does serve the people who are actually doing bad things, because you create a fire over here that credible people want to draw attention to an issue. But because you're so far on the other side, people's eyes are away from what the truth actually is. And I think that's in effect basically what people like Alex Jones do, where there's harm being done and you could just say ridiculous stuff, get clicks, and then some people will jump to defend that rather than like saying, okay, well, let's just look at the data, let's assess things, and let's find what the truth is, and let's go from there. People, it's the too long didn't read generation, essentially.
Yes, and the key to defeating evil is knowledge, but knowledge comes at a price, and it comes through the dissolution of your innocence. And I think about it all the time, Kyle. I wish I could go back to the early 1990s, late 80s, where I was ignorant about the world, watching cartoons or whatnot, and rooting for the Yankees, and I had no clue about what was happening around me. I was happier then. Starting about the early 2000s, mid 2000s, when I started educating myself. I'm still educating myself. I'm no expert about anything. And I see, a little bit about what's happening around the world and around me. I have become more depressed, and I've become more, I guess, crankier in my age now. I'm 53. And that is because I see other people around me who are espousing this, willful ignorance about the world around them, and they have no idea about the dangers that are posed to them and to the people that are around them. And this basically is the war between the yin and yang of the mind itself. If you want to change the paradigm of the whole structure, it will come through a sacrifice of yourself. And I'm not talking about you killing people and killing yourself or harming others. The only way to destroy the power structure at hand is for the majority of the people to basically pull that proverbial ivy out of their arm about what's being fed to them through the legacy media and through disinformation channels like Alex Jones, and get rid of these divisive human constructs that are meant to divide and imbues you away from each other, like religion and racism and politics. And when I say we don't need religion, that we don't need spirituality, there's a difference. That we don't need, if I may be saying that we don't need racism, but we do have culture. These are differences between each other, but they involve everybody else. But as long as we are divided and wanting and needing and sickly and poor, the enemy that we're seeing is going to be within ourselves. But that's not the case. The enemy is the people who made us this way. And incidentally enough, these are the people that we gave power to, right, authority to. There's a great quote by Alexander Solzhenitsyn, is that if you appease a man's conscience, you could take his freedom away from him. Well, that's exactly what's happening to us. But they do it ever so gradually, so we don't notice. Because if we do notice, and if we do have everybody's attention, or the majority of people's attention, that's when we could threaten the power structure. Chris Hedges, a former New York Times reporter, award-winning reporter, basically said, and he used this in lectures they used to do, and it's in Henry Kissinger's memoirs about this growing anti-war sentiment around Vietnam, around the White House, and so they barricaded the White House with these yellow school bus vans, and National Guard is outside, and Henry Kissinger is out, standing next to Richard Nixon, looking out the window, and Nixon says, "Henry, they're going to get in here and they're going to, get us. They're going to capture us." And that's exactly, Hedges says, that's exactly where you want power. You want them to feel that we can take away at any moment the power that we give them to govern us. But we have not ever threatened these people. In fact, the last time we did this was January 6th, and it was a very, very poor attempt. And meanwhile, these Congress people basically said, this is worse than 9/11. This is worse than Pearl Harbor. Oh, I didn't know 3,000 people died on January 6th. Yeah. Nevertheless, I agreed with the point. Hey, that's exactly. But we went on the wholly wrong pretenses of like having the worst type of people going there under the most false pretenses of, oh, there was a there was a conspiracy about the voting process. There's a conspiracy about the voting process every 4 years. Right. Do you really think that we have a say about who governs us? Mm-hmm. Absolutely not. For God's sakes, these people come into power even without our votes. Mm-hmm. We are powerless right now. That we feel that we're powerless, but we're not. We just have to believe that, yes, we do have the power, and we do. Mm-hmm. Without us, they have nothing. Remember that they are there because of us. Mm-hmm. But we have to believe that we're more powerful than they are, and we are. But we just have to know it. And do we know it? No, we tend to not believe it. And that's why I go into the spiel about my favorite quote about belief versus knowledge. And that, the primary problem with the American people is that they're allowed to believe anything, but to know nothing. And right. Without knowledge, we can't act on it. And mm-hmm. we can't use that to defeat the evil that is, the U.S. federal government.
Yeah, I mean, it truly is a form of Stockholm syndrome, and
Mm.
I say that a lot in regards to Donald Trump because, um, I think what people kind of wanted out of the populist right movement, specifically Donald Trump, and I still see people talking about this, is they yearn for a hero. And the message that I try to tell people is that you have to be the hero in your own story because there's nobody that's going to come to save you, which sounds grim. But that should be the most encouraging message in the world, that you can affect your surroundings, you can affect your community, you can affect your family, and you can change things for the better if you're willing to go out there and get it. Now, does that mean you're going to be able to reconstruct the entire federal government? Probably not.
Mm.
But if you start with yourself and then you can inform yourself and make those around you a little bit more robust and feel a little bit more confident, then once again, that scales, that goes to other people, that goes to your family members, and then that goes out to their family members, and so on and so forth. And it seems like um we're kind of doing this in the liberty movement, but there's still just a lot of grinding the gears over culture war issues, which when you zoom out, they're really not that big of a deal. But it's like these are thrown in our face to, for the purpose of dividing us. It's very, very frustrating. And as I said earlier on in the show, one thing I really admire about you is your ability to remove your own bias. And I try to do that as much as I can. I'll be the first one to admit that generally I may default a little bit more to like culturally right things because my values tend to line up more with like social conservative values. That being said, I recognize that bias and try to decipher the information from a more neutral standpoint. And it seems like you have at least been able to kind of remove your own bias and, like I said earlier, admit when you're speculating and also look at things without saying that just not being a partisan hack. And that's one thing that's always just driven me insane about some people is just this partisan hackery to make whatever needs to look good for you look good and whatever to everybody else look bad.
Yeah, well, you're very nuanced, and this is the key to understanding the problems that we're facing. Is that if we just placated or just eliminated, and it takes years of getting rid of the divisive human applicants that we're led to believe, we'll see the world as not just black and white, but as gray. And that's exactly what the world is. It's very confusing, it's very complex, and it's made this way so it can confuse you and complex you into a multitude of different paradigms. But you're a human being. That's what you share with everybody else, and that's what we share with the whole world, is that we came from the universe and that we're here on this planet. And for most people, Kyle, that's not enough. They want to be in a specific class and
Right.
special, and have these special abilities and rights away from everybody else. But you already have that, and you have that within your own human physiology and psychology. We are different in our own, like no two snowflakes are alike, but with the commonality is that we're all the same, but we share different different generalities, different intricacies within us. But as long as we continue to placate our desires and whatever selfish desires those are, or through the number of different beliefs that we have within us, we're never going to get anywhere that's really going to threaten the establishment and make real change. I've always said that if you had 10 million people protest against, say, the corruption that's happening within Ukraine, for example, and the Democrats, you can make change. 10 million people, you can. Chris Hedges thinks it's about 2-3 million people, 5 million maybe. I think if you get about 10, you could definitely get the attention of the world. And not everybody's bought and paid for in the media. We still have media channels that are out there reporting, the real happenings and the real problems of the world. They're not getting the attention like the legacy media. But, if you could get 10 million people to basically just say, hey, we are tired of the nonsense and we want real change, you're going to get the attention of the world. And guess what? A lot of the world are basically going to agree with you, because guess what? The United States basically affects just about every place on the face of the earth. And yeah, you'll be called an enemy, you'll be called a traitor, and you'll be called an anarchist or a liberal or, you know, a right-wing fanatic. But if you don't have any of those platitudes, you have nothing to worry about. Hey, you know, I'm a human being and I want something that's right. And this is the reason why I'm fully entrenched with the people at Anti-War Libertarian Institute, that's Scott Horton and Kyle Anzalone, and you know, Connor McDavid and Patrick McFarlane, those guys, Will Porter, you know, those guys are phenomenal. And I wish they got more of the attention that they sorely deserve, and they deserve it all. But you know, it's sad to see that, you know, there's too many people, you know, still vote and still think that, you know, it's going to work for them.
Yeah, I completely agree. And even amongst our own, you know, movement, if you will, I get frustrated because I do see sometimes people getting promoted that I feel don't necessarily deserve the back pats they're being given. And I talk to Pat almost every single day, and you know, someone like him who did a lot of really good work on like the China stuff, I just admire that so much. And so like with the Uyghur stuff, like nobody had touched that because this is something that's kind of beyond the pale, right? You're supposed to just believe this narrative, but Pat was able to dig deep and, you know, really prove that whole narrative wrong. And the sad part about kind of this stuff, and this is kind of the big meta, if you will, of what we've been talking about, is you have someone like Tim Cast, who has on Alex Jones and all these populist right wingers. They seem credible, but the problem is that while they're not necessarily always aligned up with the legacy media, they drop just enough truth bombs out there for you to think that they're credible, but then they end up following the narrative of the mainstream news every here and there, but they don't do it enough to throw you off guard. So they seem legitimate, but as a whole, they're not. So I know that's kind of all over the place, but I really wish those guys at the Libertarian Institute and antiwar.com got more recognized, because they really are putting out the truth. And sometimes the truth isn't as exciting as you hope it to be. You know, when I hear about diet stuff, oh, did you try the carnivore diet? Did you try low carb? Did you try going vegan? Did you try low fat? The non-sexy truth of it is, if you eat more calories than your body can expend in a day, you're going to get fatter. If you eat less, you're going to get skinnier. That's just the way it is. And that a lot of the supplements, the dick pills, you know, you name it, that stuff, a lot of it may not work as you're being sold. So and that works with media as well, is that sometimes when you dig deep enough, you're just going to find that the truth just isn't as exciting as you want it to be. But once again, if you can create a tar baby and you could say something that's so ridiculous and off the wall, then everybody stares and looks, and then, you know, oh, look at me, I did something right for once. But if you can just, you know, preach the truth, then hopefully there's enough people out there kind of looking for it, you know?
Yeah, you know, great example of this is Dave DeCamp. I've interviewed Dave DeCamp for the Darkened Hour, me and Richard Cox, my host. And Dave, we were talking about the Yemen crisis. And Dave DeCamp is one of the leading voices regarding this issue. And, you know, here's a guy I absolutely respect and admire, because I've met Dave DeCamp at the Libertarian Institute with Reed Coverdale and Eric Jackman. And, you know, Dave DeCamp is basically, you know, just literally a Britannica when it comes to geopolitics in general. But you won't hear the name anywhere outside the Libertarian Institute. And to me, that's the real crime, is that these are the people, like we said before, McFarlane, Horton. Well, Horton's a little bit more known, but people like Connor McDavid, Connor Freeman, Patrick McFarlane, and Dave DeCamp, you know, Will Porter, Kyle Anzalone, you know, nobody outside of the Libertarian Institute will hear these names. And Kyle Anzalone himself, how many episodes that guy's done? He does like 3-4 episodes a day, basically talking about the issues involving what's happening in Russia, in Ukraine, in Yemen, in China, in North Korea. And all these issues are basically affecting all of us because it's done in our name as Americans. But, you know, you ain't going to hear it because, you know, people are more in tune with the New York Post or Washington Post, Los Angeles Times. And it's easy to listen to Tim Cast and Tim Pool and that crony Luke Radowski and, you know, these other people, and they'll go to other leftist channels too on the opposite end of the spectrum.
Yeah.
And basically they'll listen to, Joy Behar, The View. And like, what's wrong with you people? Why? Because it's more entertaining to the eye and the ear. And because these guys are young and they basically make hip statements and whatnot. And like you said, Kyle, the truth is basically something that isn't very sexy enough, but it is a threat to the establishment itself. When I say establishment, I don't mean that as a vague term. I'm talking about specifically the Republican Democratic parties and, of course, the private military industrial complex as well. And we can name names and whatnot. I don't like to be like Alex Jones or Tim Pool, talking generalities, threaten the establishment, the Illuminati, New World Order, all that shit is nonsense. But when you threaten people with, by going public with their crimes, that's exactly what we need to do. And we need to do it with more people on board. We can't do it with less people on board because we're not going to be heard.
Right. So yeah, that was in large part of the reason why I wanted to bring up I'm working on it. I've never written an article before, but I'm trying to build this comprehensive takedown and breakdown of Steve Bannon's history and then his history into Miles Glow, because I'm sure you kind of run into this too, and maybe we could talk about this, but like when you start digging into people and trying to find their financial history and different information, you end up with lawsuits, and then they'll bring up names, and then you find those names, and those names have connections, and you just end up in a never-ending spiral of information, and you can never really, it's hard to just get it all in aggregate and write it all down. Like when I was reading stuff about Miles Glow, it's like, oh, well, this guy had his 20-year-old daughter as the owner of his boat that Steve Bannon was arrested on. Oh, well, his daughter has never actually ridden on the boat, but his daughter's the one whose name it's in, because there was a lawsuit and the ship was supposed to be, I think it was like repoed essentially. And it was at a repair shop under his daughter's name. Well, once again, this is in a lawsuit, and then you find another lawsuit, and it's just, you end up going all over the place. So, and another interesting thing about this whole populist right movement, I'm sorry to be dragging us all over the place here, but with Miles Glow in particular, there was a cryptocurrency called G-Coin, I think it was, in GTV that put out a lot of this stuff like you'd see on the Epic Times, that they had a crypto token that actually essentially defrauded people, and they agreed to pay the SEC $439 million because of it wasn't a secure investment and investors had lost money on it. And it's funny how you never hear about that, but you're hearing all about the FTX scandal, and it always gets put into this partisan lens. Like you're hearing this with the groomer stuff, you're hearing it with FTX stuff. Oh, it's just all Democrats that are groomers. It's just all Democrats that are getting money through FTX. And while I think there's probably a large degree of truth to it, we're hiding the fact that Republicans have done a lot of this stuff too. And that at one point, a Speaker of the House who was a Republican was literally a pedophile. And that gets just thrown out the window because now grooming, it's just leftists that are groomers. And now you even see leftists starting to call Republicans groomers. And it's like, you can't maintain a dialogue when everybody that disagrees with you, that's another thing. Everyone that disagrees with you is a groomer. Everyone disagrees with you is a demon. Everyone that disagrees with you is a Nazi. So like just the way that the conversation's going today, it's mind blowing to me. And I'm not a religious person, but like when I see people saying that everybody, all these leftists are possessed by demons, I'm like, you guys are calling atheists cringe, but like you're literally saying people are possessed by demons. Like let's just zoom out here for a second.
I think when it comes to corruption, you talk about Steve Bannon. Well, let's go back to his problem back in August 20th of 2020, where he was actually charged by the Southern District of New York, along with Brian, I'm going to butcher his last name, I think it's Killage or something like that, and 3 other defendants regarding the Build the Wall campaign.
That he knew was a fraud.
Yeah, that he knew it was a fraud and got millions, I think it was millions and millions of dollars, tens of millions from taxpayer money. By the way, where's the wall? But he was pardoned. He was pardoned by Donald Trump expectedly. And that's because I think, Bannon was the former CEO of Breitbart News, I think.
Yeah, well, he was also the White House strategist there for a little bit, and then was let go. Yeah,
that's right, Kyle. Thank you, for sure. So they'll protect their own when it comes to corruption, but when it comes to overall corruption from the Democrats, Republicans, God's sakes, take your pick, right? I mean, a great example of this, Kyle, is that the squad, as they're called, that's Rashida Tlaib, Alexandria Cortez, and Cori Bush, I think.
Ayanna Presley is her name, I think.
Thank you very much. That's right. So you have these three young women who basically had such full of vigor and basically want to threaten the establishment. They're going to do this because they're for progressive values. And I said, all right, everybody comes in with this, big head, think they're going to change the world. Let's see if they do it. I remember this back in 2018, 2019. And as soon as, about a year comes in, all of a sudden they meet Nancy Pelosi, who's like, the queen of like corruption and, anti-ethical American values, everything in itself. But, slowly but surely, she's showing them how how Congress really works. And what Congress really works is that it is through corruption and it is through manipulation of the people. There is no other way. If you're an honest congressperson, man or woman, no matter where political party you align with, if you do not become a spoke of the wheel, so to speak, and work within the establishment, well, you're not lasting very long. Right. If you're going to be a high critical of, say, Israel, well, guess what? You're not going to get those votes from the Hasidic community or from the Zionist community, even from both, even though they both share very disparaging views of each other. But, if you're not, if you don't work with Nancy Pelosi or Mitch McConnell, so to speak, or if you won't work with, a high, powerful, influential member of the Republican or Democrat, or someone from the House or the Senate, and you're seen as what's the word? You're seen as a threat almost. I don't think
pariah.
It's seen as a threat. What's that?
As like a pariah?
Yeah, you're seen as more of a pariah, so to speak. So you won't get those necessary votes. Say you want a vote for, in your district, you want, say, $2 million for the roads to be built in some district of your area. So, you won't get the money or the backing from your constituents because you're seen as a rogue player, somebody who's not willing to fit in with the corruption of the establishment. So no matter who you are, if you have all the intents and purposes of serving the community honestly, well, that's not going to be the case for long. You won't last for long because you won't service the real establishment, and that is the establishment of the rich and the powerful and influential. And what they want is not what the people want.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's a very, very sad truth. So one thing that was kind of interesting to me and was this whole Speaker of the House situation that just happened this past week. And it was very, very telling. And there was some good and some bad. So when I saw Matt Gaetz, who I've been insanely critical of, willing to go against Trump, who this dude has just never missed an opportunity to take a full-blown concussion from his penis to his brain. Seeing him disagree with Trump was actually very, very admirable. And I called that out. I said, that's seeing him say that I disagree with Trump, who I've never, who he greatly admires, admirable. And then Lauren Boebert did the same thing. To see some of these guys go away from the monolithic kind of, MAGA chud line was, once again, I respect that a lot. But Marjorie Taylor Greene, it's interesting to see her willing to stand on her own amongst those peers, because, they're normally all very monolithic in their support for Donald Trump. To see Marjorie Taylor Greene disagree with them and die on the Hill for McCarthy is admirable in one regard, but the other regard, it's also very bad because it's like, this is where you're going to die. You sat here and said not one more penny for Ukraine, and everybody has cheered you on for that. I mean, all the people in our space has said, like, this is great that she's doing that. Now, obviously, she's not good in Iran, Israel, or China, but in this one regard, she's excellent. But when you're nominating the Speaker of the House who has 2 Ukraine lapels and said, well, I don't know if we want to send a blank check to Ukraine, but like 115, what is it, $1 billion? We could do that, but it's just the blank check, a little too much. It really nullifies all of her criticisms, because now you've put somebody in one of the most powerful seats in our government to be Speaker of the House who's going to continue to fund this proxy war. So it's like, how much more can we take you seriously? So once again, I know I keep throwing a lot at you, but like this whole nomination of the speaker was an interesting scenario. And the two things that I really took away from it was it's nice to see people not monolithically go for Donald Trump. And maybe this is the sign of the times and they're going to move towards DeSantis. We can touch on that. But it was also interesting to see Marjorie Taylor Greene's independent streak, but also the fact that it seems like a lot of her criticisms are just criticisms. There's no action. They're just criticisms at this point. So your thoughts?
I love that you bring this up, because I was reading the other day that the Republicans are basically having something that the Democrats are not doing, and that is debate within the House. But
Right.
So, all right, let me put this into context as clearly as I can. There is a dividing line within the Republicans right now that the Democrats don't have. And that is, there are two Republican factors: Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida, and of course, Donald Trump. One is basically a megalomaniac, a narcissist. That's Donald Trump. One is an establishment type who caters to the corporate narratives of Israel and not so much the Gulf, but wants to engage in conflict with China and Iran.
And South America as well. That's something that not a lot of people touch on.
Yeah, very good, Kyle. That's the issue about Argentina, about the oil fields regarding that, which, by the way, has gone largely ignored, and the economic sanctions we have on the country regarding Iran as well. So you have this, it's not a debate, by the way, it's more of a fraction between the two. Right. There's a lot of friction between them right now. But I would say as we got closer to 2024, if DeSantis, who I think is going to win the majority of the conservatives backing.
I think so too.
I think Trump has run his, Trump will basically acquiesce, and he'll do it very regretfully, but he'll see that the benefactor is that, I'd rather see DeSantis than, say, a revisitation of, the mummy Biden, who they want to run again. I can't believe it. Yeah. And Hillary Clinton. If the Democrats want to win some votes, they would get Governor Newsom, who's much more younger and much more in line with the younger youth. But that's the reason why the Democrats lost in 2016, is because they ran Hillary Clinton, and Clinton has no commonality with the American people.
Right.
Trump does. Trump basically is the first president that basically showed you a glimpse of what was going behind the curtains of the establishment, and people feared him for it. And that's the reason why a lot of people, even the conservative party, basically were highly critical of him. Now, I'm not defending Donald Trump in any way. I think he was terrible, but so is every other president. But Donald Trump basically gave us a glimpse of what goes behind the scenes. And what we see is a horror of, malcontents, pedophiles and corruption and, all these people that are basically allegedly representing us. And what do you think the rest of the world sees? Oh, they see these people. Kevin McCarthy has voted the House Speaker, but yet Kevin McCarthy's policies are not in line with most of Trump's when it comes to foreign policy. Trump is basically trying to end, I guess, the conflict with Ukraine to an extent, but he's a continuation of the policies of Obama and Bush. McCarthy basically said in 2016, 2015 that and this is before, the conflict ramping up in Ukraine, that he thinks two people, one of them being Putin, is a threat to the world. Basically thinks that Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar, who was part of that progressive group as well, basically said that they're threats to the establishment of Israel because they dare speak out against the Zionist policies of Israel, which McCarthy has to back because it's the only way you stay in power. So, I mean, and also voiced support for Hong Kong protesters, writing that I think he said something about the NBA seems more worried about losing business than standing up for freedom. You think this guy cares about freedom in what goes on in Taiwan or China? Give me a break. These people don't care. What they care about is their interests, and their interests involve money. And, that's where the real money comes from when it comes from war. Smedley Butler basically says, war is a racket. Well, yeah, it is. It's also a financial benefactor to many people in Congress. George Orwell once wrote in 1984 that war was not meant to be won; it was meant to be continuous. Well, how many years have the United States been at war at some point?
Pretty much most of its existence.
Yeah. I think within the 200 and last 200 years, it's according to the World Health Organization, the United States has been at war for 188 of those years.
Jesus. Yeah, and it's crazy. I was born in 1994, so for a majority of my life, the U.S. has been at war, and it's almost cliche to say it because so many people say it, but there are people who are now old enough to go serve. Actually, there's people who were born when the 9/11 attacks happened that can now go drink alcohol at a bar.
That's stunning, isn't it? Really.
And we're still at war because of that. Now, it's also interesting that there was never a formal declaration of war. There's just the authorized use of military force, which it's like mental gymnastics to say that and not call it war, but it is just that, obviously. I was thinking about this earlier. My wife and I are watching Jack Ryan again because it just came out with season 3. I don't know if you've watched that.
No.
Okay, so it is kind of like literally neocon propaganda. It's made by Tom Clancy, if you know who Tom Clancy is. Yeah. So you know what it's coming at. And it is a great show, don't get me wrong. Like the characters and the story's really interesting. But I was gonna tweet this out that I think Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis both watched season 2 of Jack Ryan because it's literally just propaganda about Venezuela and how Venezuela was going to get nukes from Russia or something like that. So I think at the end of the show, the main character, Jack Ryan, I think he either kills the president of Venezuela or like arrests him or something like that. So you know what it is. But yeah, if you look up the show, it'll say it's pretty much like CIA propaganda. And the other interesting thing about all these kind of military films and propaganda is that you don't get the military equipment unless, you agree to take funding from them or promote, military stuff. So like if your film has a certain agenda to it, then they don't give you the props from the military. So, the whole South America stuff was really something I didn't know until I started talking to another mutual friend of ours, Robbie Martin. When I listened to Robbie and Abby talking about some of the stuff that was going on in South America, I'm like, I never knew that. But this is another area where actually a lot of the populist right-wingers are really bad on. Like this guy, Anthony Sabatini, who was kind of hoisted to a lot of libertarians. And I was told that this guy's like, he's a anarcho-capitalist, but he's just running as a Republican. And then if you look, the two moments that I stopped believing that this guy was somebody that we should listen to was when he said we should execute Cuban leaders, literally like verbatim. He said we should, he has to forfeit being in the government or something like that, and then be executed. And then the other one was he tweeted out the key takeaway from 9/11 is that we need an immigration moratorium. I'm like, this dude's a fucking moron. I'm sorry, but that is like as dumb as the day is long. As a guy who's supposed to be a libertarian saying that the key takeaway from 9/11 is an immigration moratorium, I can't take him seriously anymore. So once again, I know I threw a lot at you, but just anything you got.
Yeah, no. For those who are not aware about what's going on in Venezuela. You have an ongoing socioeconomic crisis, as well as a political crisis that's been going on since the presidency of Hugo Chavez, but has worsened with Nicolas Maduro. It's been marked by what's happening here, hyperinflation, but they have a problem with starvation as well, affecting over 250,000 people per capita. And which led to a rise of crime, disease, and mortality rates that are affecting, every aspect of waking life regarding the people in Venezuela, which has caused a lot of people to basically become uninterested because, legacy media, of course, is not reporting on what is happening. Now, with Maduro himself, he's the president of Venezuela since 2013. There's a huge problem with the United States and Venezuela itself, and that is that the foreign policy between them isn't as pronounced. And what is happening with most of South America is that they are basically the benefactors of every ugly intervention with the United States, starting as back in the 1940s and 50s. Now, my co-host Richard Cox did a great series. I think the best series I ever heard. It's called the Empire series, where he talks about the United States intervention in countries like Puerto Rico and Hawaii and South America and Central America. And he goes into great detail. And I would recommend anybody to listen to that. Now, as for generalities of Central America, I'm not very much educated on that subject.
Mhm.
But one thing is for certain is that the presidency of Maduro has been a disaster as of late regarding what is happening in Venezuela. But the United States basically doesn't care about, Colombia, Venezuela, and Honduras or anything like that. They've been primarily victims of the CIA and the coups that have happened throughout the 1970s and 80s through the banana wars and whatnot. And basically, what has happened is that it's led to a rise of corruption to where it would put like Medellin, Colombia, to shame. One of the most dangerous gangs in the whole world is MS-13, and it's arising out of the, I think it's Honduras, I think, the country that MS-13 is from. In fact, I'm going to cheat, see if I'm right.
Oh, that's okay. Is Maduro, was he... I'm a little foggy on the Venezuela stuff, and like I said, I only learned about it because of Media Roots Radio. But was he installed by the U.S.? Because I know they were trying to overthrow. They were trying to do a coup. The CIA, that is, was trying to do a coup in Venezuela. Was he installed, or was that failed? I'm sorry, I can't remember.
I want to say that he became president after he defeated. He had a long name. Radonsky or something like that. Mm-hmm. But there was a lot of, he won by 230,000 votes. There was a huge conspiracy behind that, saying that there was some election interference, mm-hmm. and one of them being, of course, the United States. And I wouldn't be surprised, because Maduro basically policies in line with the United States, and that's the reason why. Radonsky basically he was a power player within it's a lower capitalists of the country itself. So he was also a lawyer, and he's I want to say he co-founded Primero Justica, Primero Justice, which is a small group of basically a center right party, but it wasn't very popular with the United States, and they basically wanted Maduro to win. And I don't know for sure if there was any election fraud, but would it surprise you, Kyle, if there was? Which is the reason why we implemented a lot of the leaders in Central America throughout the 70s and 80s and killed a lot of people. I forgot that guy's name who wrote, he was basically a financial hitman. It's going to kill me. He's done some interviews before, and he was interviewed by Chris Hedges and whatnot. He's a reputable guy. He wrote a book. And forgive me, I forgot his name. He basically was behind a lot of those coups in Central America in the 70s, and basically was acting on accordance with the United States through the, I think it was the Carter and Ford administrations and whatnot. Okay. I could be wrong about the generation or two, but he basically was acting as a financial advisor to the United States government, and tried to persuade some of these people to basically say, hey, wait a minute, instead of, invoking your own policies, you should try working with the United States. And basically some of those people weren't, and they basically were either upended through a coup or basically assassinated. And I wouldn't be surprised Maduro was implemented as a president through election interference in the United States. Wouldn't be the first time. And this is the reason why I'm saying, like, with the January 6th deal, all these leftists and basically saying, oh, they're trying to force, election interference. Well, what the hell are you surprised about? We do it all the time. We do it all the time around the world. You only care because it's basically upending, the democratic establishment that you favor. So yeah, I think there's a lot of hypocrisy along with it. So yeah, when it comes to Maduro, I'm not surprised that the United States basically implied him in power. Would it be too much of a fringe conspiracy? No, because we've done it before.
Yeah. So the South America stuff is really interesting, and now I guess we could kind of shift over to DeSantis because this seems to be something that's really building, and this is something where libertarians even kind of infight about. So obviously, let's get the standard caveat out of the way. Yes, during COVID-19, he was excellent, and my wife and I vacationed to Florida. We got married in Florida. I would live in Florida if I could, right? Because I love the weather, and I say it all the time, but like the air just feels like happiness down there. So I have no problem with him being there, and I think he should stay there. Now, moving on from that, let's look at his voting record. You would be hard pressed to find where he disagreed with Marco Rubio, of all people, other than regime change in Syria, which he later changed his mind on because it was no longer Obama's war in Syria. It was Trump dropping bombs on Syria. And the frustrating thing when it comes to Syria, and I'm very, very ignorant on Syria, I don't know anything about it really, is people always say, oh, Trump bombed Syria. It's like, well, you don't understand how bad Trump's, drone strike legacy was. I mean, multiples and multiples worse in the first 2 years of his term than Obama's entire 8 years.
Which is unbelievable.
Yeah, it's absolutely unbelievable. So just this idea that he was some peacetime president is just like mind blowing to me. There's people really peddle this out. Like I talk to people all the time who say, oh, Trump, there were no wars under Trump. Like, you are out of your mind. And I get it because, once again, misinformation on the other side, and it's to your narrative. Trump looks like a good guy if there were no wars on his watch. So DeSantis, great on COVID, but he's a total neocon. I mean, he worked in Guantanamo Bay and also was in Fallujah in 2005 under he was a Navy JAG officer and this elite who went to a, Yale or a Ivy League school. And I don't know if you listened to I think it's the Eyes Left podcast. Abby Martin's husband, I think, ran it.
Lee Camp?
Okay, no,
Is that her husband?
Yeah, no. Okay, yeah, it was Lee Camp, I think, who did the interview with somebody who was actually at Guantanamo Bay at the same time DeSantis was. Are you familiar with that at all?
No.
Okay, so yeah, if you get a chance after this, I definitely recommend listening to it because it's very interesting. And as good Samaritans as I like to believe that we are, I want to approach this with a healthy amount of skepticism. You have one person who was in Guantanamo Bay when DeSantis was, and DeSantis was sent there to basically make sure that human rights were being observed and followed when people were being tortured in Guantanamo Bay, right? Basically, what DeSantis did by this person's account, and once again, this is just one person's account, is that he talked to them and figured out what they didn't like, what was going on, and just, hey, what could we do to make your life better? And he exploited that and made their torture much worse, as in all the things they told him were bad. He made sure that it was a lot worse. And then when in Fallujah, obviously that was a very, very bad time in Fallujah in 2005, 2006. He was there to oversee human rights as well. So, and that anytime the government refers to human rights, it's in violation of them, or they're going to doctor it to make it look like they weren't violating them. So, once again, this is just one person's account, but it's definitely noted. And if you look at his voting history and the way that he talks about other countries, and even the way that he talks about the death penalty, it's kind of hard not to think that he's not literally just George Bush 2.0. So once again, I know I threw a whole ton at you, but what are your thoughts with DeSantis 2024? Because I agree with you. I think he's going to be the guy.
What's up, everybody? We're going to take a quick break and tell you about the show's sponsors. We are brought to you by LMNT Electrolytes. I've been using this stuff for years, and what I've honestly found is that if I didn't have electrolytes before some kind of cardio, and sometimes even before workouts, that my workout performance, or definitely cardio performance, would suffer greatly. Sodium is responsible for every single movement pretty much in your entire body, and let's say you drink a lot of caffeine like I like to do, then maybe it is a good idea, like I do every single morning, put some LMNT chocolate electrolytes there in your coffee to get a little bit more sodium, potassium, and magnesium in your coffee, so that way whatever diuretic effect you get from the caffeine is pretty much diluted by the fact that you put chocolate salt in it. Also, it tastes really, really good. Get some chocolate cream or hazelnut cream or even coconut, and mix that all up. It tastes really, really good. So yeah, make sure you drop by, go to drinklmnt.com/inlibertyandhealth and pick you up some electrolytes today. All right, guys, thanks.
He's going to win the presidency, I think, in 2024.
Yeah.
And I think he has the majority of the conservatives behind him. He's also young, very invigorating. A lot of people gravitate toward that. You know, we have a lot of younger people now voting than ever before. And I think what they want to do is swing those votes from the Democratic Party, who have a lot of young people, believe it or not, and want to try to get the fence sitters, not so much the people who are establishment, you know, I hate to use that term, woke types. God,
Right.
I hate that term. So yeah,
I know why.
Yeah, no, it's just ridiculous. Yeah, they want to try and get the fence sitters as much as possible. This is something that, you know, they failed in 2020, is that they basically catered to just their own circle. They did not go out. Republicans did not, and I think they learned their lesson from this. DeSantis did. And this is the reason why he separated from Trump. He saw Trump. Trump only catered to his own circles. This was a huge political mistake on Trump's part. And this is the reason why he lost. And, you know, say what you want about electric fraud and, you know, all these votes, you know, really came from dead people or people that didn't exist. Well, the Republicans played that too. So the Democrats just cheated, you know, more. That's all. And they won. Right. So, so Biden, basically, the Democrats, what they don't do well is that they don't showcase, they don't know how to appease the American audience. They won't throw out like people like, you know, a young hip person like they should do with Newsom. Newsom is a lot younger than Biden and Clinton and, you know, those old mummies. And then if you have someone like Bernie Sanders caters to like, you know, that, you know, progressive crowd, but
Right.
you know, he's been losing a lot of that luster, and especially with the latest debacle with the House floor regarding
The War Powers Resolution.
yeah, the civil war in Yemen. So he lost, you know, his votes there. But as long as they put out these mummies that basically are not up, and they don't have the energy behind them, and they don't have that, I guess, that, you know, persuasive ability about them. DeSantis has that. DeSantis is really a go-getter. He's out there. He's very active. He travels around the world. He goes around the country. He won't just stay in Florida. He'll do what Trump doesn't do. You know, Trump, yeah, he'll have his rallies here and there, but the rallies only cater to that one specific group. DeSantis is going to go out and get those fence sitters. He's going to go out and say, hey, aren't you tired of this and that? He'll say all the right things that the Biden administration, the Trump administration doesn't say, and that he's going to get those financial backers behind him. And the more financial backers behind DeSantis, the more apt he's going to win. I think what's going to happen is the Biden administration has been a total disaster. Nothing has changed, like he said in that dinner, that audio dinner that somebody caught, that nothing is going to fundamentally change. Well, nothing didn't. The only thing that changed was the more closing of businesses during the COVID crisis, which was a complete and utter disaster, in which the economic ramifications are not going to be felt until DeSantis gets into office, which is usually the case, and he's going to get blamed for that. But you know, with COVID, with foreign policy, a disaster regarding Saudi Arabia, in which he visited, tried to, you know, get more barrel production of oil, and even the Crown Prince bin Salman said no, and that's the first time he ever said no to a sitting president. Yemen, the worst humanitarian crisis in the world currently, we're still funding the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, which Biden basically ran on the premise of saying he wouldn't and broke that promise.
Yep.
Everything that Biden did, it was a complete disaster. And I think what's going to happen is basically a lot of those people, the centrists, are basically going to gravitate to DeSantis. I don't know who the Democrats are going to run, but according to what I'm hearing, Biden again and Hillary Clinton again. I will assure you, 2024 will be red. And then the real fun begins. Because like I said before, if you want to see real crazies, just like you said, Kyle, DeSantis' foreign policy is an extension of Bush, and you want to see a real neocon, here it is. And he's young, too. And he has the backing of the one institution that is basically making a revisit in Israel, and as the American Israeli Public Affairs Committee, also known as AIPAC. Because guess what? Guess who's prime minister once yet again? That's right, the murderous sociopath, Benjamin Netanyahu. Do you see where this is going, ladies and gentlemen? By 2024, we're going to see what I've always believed to be a war with Iran. And I think that's going to be the case in 2024 or 2026, between those years. Horton disagrees with me on that, but I'm going to hold my guns and say that's going to be the case.
I agree with you. I hate to disagree with Scott, but it's so funny because this Iran situation is such like a gaslit issue because they've always have been very, very compliant and very, very willing to negotiate with the U.S. I mean, we have them under crippling sanctions, and every single time that we flirt around with going back to the nuclear deal, they're like begging for it. Hey, we'll let you inspect everything. Just say you'll stay in for this term, just for Biden's term. And we keep kicking them to the curb every single time. And we've been hearing for literally 30 years. The one thing I love to bring up with people is the coined term a Friedman unit back in, I think it was the 90s, where they call a Friedman unit 6 months because there was a guy with the last name Friedman who kept saying Iran is 6 months away from having a nuke, and he kept saying that, so people eventually coined the term Friedman unit, if I remember correctly. And DeSantis is horrible on this. He's atrocious on Iran. And Trump was too, airstriking one of their generals. It's not shaping up to be a good situation, and Biden hasn't been good on it. So, we can keep spitting in their eye, but how long, are they going to tolerate it? They've been plenty patient over the last, how long, but, I think people don't realize that, the Democrats especially have not realized how far they pushed a lot of people in this country, where now I feel like we're going to have that, as you said, DeSantis, who culturally really represents a lot of people on the right now, and a lot of people resonate with him, and they see the way he's very decisive and accurate in what he wants. I think his presidency is not going to be that way, but they like that about him. They like this decisiveness. They like this firm kind of guy that DeSantis is, and they're willing to ignore all this horrible, horrible foreign policy stuff just because he's going to culturally win. So, when you're seeing these artificially boosted drag shows, which are all over the place now, and I don't believe it's a natural thing. I think this is being put out there to aggravate people. I think it's, we're going to have that, I don't want to say right-wing dictator, because I don't think it's going to be that bad, but you're going to get a sharp fucking reaction. Trump was a little bit of that, but I think DeSantis is going to be much worse.
In September of 2018, Benjamin Netanyahu went to the United Nations General Assembly and basically held up this, cardboard cutout of a bomb that basically said that, Israel is, that closer to getting a nuclear bomb. It was similar to what the United States did in the United Nations Security Council in 2003 when they were going to war with Iraq, and they showed these cartoons of caves with all these chemical biological factories in them. And I'm like, wow, that's your evidence? That's what you got?
It's so silly on its face to think about that.
I mean, God's sakes. I mean, we're living in a cartoon world, but I mean, this all stems from the Syrian civil war as of late. I'll keep it recent so I won't lose the attention of the audience. Regarding DeSantis' policy with Iran, it's strictly an Israel policy. This is not a U.S. policy. And, I don't know how many times I have to repeat myself before I sound like a broken record. When the Syrian war happened in 2011, they basically took advantage of the situation. And I mean, look, Assad is a brutal dictator, but at the other end of that spectrum, do you want, radical jihadists to basically govern a country and create a caliphate that basically will, continue a war with the parties involved with the war with Assad? There's no winner here. I mean, there's no winner. Same thing, happening in Afghanistan or Iraq or Ukraine. There is either you're going to have a terrible dictator, or at the other end of that spectrum, these radical fundamentalists from a nationalist point of view or a religious point of view. So what happened during the Syrian civil war was Iran got involved because Iran has longstanding relations with the Assad family that goes back many decades. And Syria is basically an extension of Iran, where there's a large minority of Shia and Alawites that live there. And they're an extension to Lebanon, which is home of Hezbollah. And, to Israel, Hezbollah is the biggest threat on the face of the earth, besides Iran. And basically what they want to do is create this Oded Yunan type of situation. And for those who think that Oded Yunan policy was a conspiracy, well, guess what? A lot of those policies within that plan came to fruition. So whether you want to say it's conspiracy or not, just, conveniently, it just so happened to work out that way, where they basically want to destroy the link between Lebanon and Iran, creating that divide and destroying the pipeline between Iran and Hezbollah, and destroy the allies to Iran, and basically create the countries like Syria and Iraq and break them up into monopolies within themselves, basically favoring the West or Israel. And at the same time, you have the Gulf, Saudi Arabia, which is basically the spokesman for Sunni branch of Islam. Meanwhile, Sunni Islam condemns them as being anti-ethical and heretical. But they're in line also with Israel and the United States, saying, we want to get rid of these the Shia minority too, and they consider them even worse than like polytheists or atheists or Jews. Mm-hmm. And so you have all these, the real axis of evil that Bush once said, this axis of evil. Yeah. The real axis of evil is the United States, Israel, and Saudi Arabia. And meanwhile, all this comes into play when it comes to the Middle East. So with Iran, DeSantis basically is going to acquiesce to Israel and basically say, yeah, all right, let's finally end this enemy. At the same time, let's make sure that the enemy never regurgitates itself. So in other words, that Syria must always be fractured and destroyed. And of course, you have the problem with Lebanon. Now, Lebanon is not as politically powerful as Syria or Iran, but they do pose a threat. But that's going to be up to Israel itself. I don't think the United States can afford to basically, intervene in that convention. But without Syria and Iran, Lebanon basically is surrounded by the Gulf and Israel itself, and they won't pose much of a threat. But as long as Hezbollah is active, and as long as Hezbollah has a link to the Persians, as long as a link to Syria, they pose a threat to Israel, which we need to keep Israel and Saudi Arabia honest. And without that, they basically will control all of the Middle East. And what's left? Israel and Saudi Arabia. Who do you think the United States is going to side with if it comes down to that? Right. Israel. It's going to be, because the largest influx of Zionists in the world resides not in Israel, but they reside in the United States. In fact, 1/3 of the voting bloc in the United States are considered technically Zionists. And when I say Zionists, I'm talking about Christian evangelicals. And they are the ruse of the whole southwest of the United States. Now, you're saying, well, how did Biden win the election if that's the case? Well, basically, a lot of those people are old, and they can't get to a voting poll and basically vote. And that's why they want to destroy mail-in voting, which is, I think, a big mistake on the Republicans' part. That's what Trump wanted, to get rid of the mail-in voting system, which basically, ruins the chance of a lot of his voting bloc to basically not vote. And I think that's, I don't know why, but Trump is not the sharpest tool in the shed. But yeah, I think when it comes to foreign policy, DeSantis poses a bigger threat than Biden or Trump ever could, because here's a guy who basically wants war on two fronts. China and Iran at the same time, which will destroy the United States. In essence, economically, we will be depleted. It will the amount of the recession that's going to come from COVID, Kyle, hasn't been hit yet. And it hasn't shown. I mean, we're going to be in a business recession quite soon. Homelessness is about to exponentially rise when the courts basically want their rents from these people, which were suspended here in New York, which I live. We're starting to see the ramifications of that. But if we go into a full-scale military invasion of a country, it will basically destroy the economics of the country that we haven't seen, even which would pale 2008.
Yeah. I mean, these military adventures have just completely robbed the American people blind to pay for them. And DeSantis doesn't seem to care a wink about that at all. And that's really interesting that you brought up the ballot harvesting idea. And I think, I'll be honest, I don't think Donald Trump won the election at all. I don't think there was any kind of manufactured scheme against him. I really think it was just a lot of poor planning on his part. And you kind of hit on this a little bit earlier. In 2020, so I live in Pennsylvania, right? And we had some pretty strict lockdowns. When you're telling people over the summer when their businesses are burning down, they're locked in their home, and you're offering them table scraps compared to everything else, and you're telling them don't vote by mail, only go in person and vote, and you're telling them that you're going to keep America great after 2020, I think a lot of people feel slapped in the face. People like me who are younger and own a house, and we see our, the future that's going to be coming forward. It's like, America's not great right now for me. So I'm sorry, I'm not convinced. And then same deal with people going like the more even younger conservative people who may be going through college or stuff like that. They don't feel America's great either, because they're like, oh, well, I have these student loans and I can't afford to pay them. I can't get a job right now because, everything's locked down and you have to get a certain treatment so that way you can get your card to go to work. And then you tell everybody don't vote by mail. All that together, I think that leads to a loss. And then you have Biden, who's a corpse, and he says, hey, I'm not that guy, and I'm going to try and make things better. People are like, oh, well, I believe him, and right now things are bad, so let's just try blue MAGA and see what happens. And obviously we see that didn't work, but then now, in response to that, now it's, okay, well, DeSantis is decisive, and he took care of Florida, so he'll take care of the United States, right? I think that's the way that it's going to go. And that's the way that I see these whole 8 years from 2016 to 2024 playing out.
It's funny is that a lot of people have amnesia when it comes to politics. So what people tend to forget is that all the initial start of the COVID policy started under Trump. And a lot of people basically tend to forget that. But one thing about Donald Trump I found, Kyle, was that I think he would have won 2020 had he not basically ruined it in the last year of his presidency, where he started saying that, oh, COVID won't hit nobody. It's a fake, leftist policy that they're trying to scare people. And then when we finally realized that, hey, wait a minute, this is a real, pandemic, so to speak, and it's actually coming to the United States, everything that he said about COVID-19 was basically false. And then afterwards, what they found out was that a lot of people in the House and Senate basically, there was this big, I say conspiracy, but it was actually a fact regarding that certain people, one of them being a former Joint House Inquiry panelist, Richard Barr, who basically had money going into, excuse me, N95 masks or something like that. There was another congresswoman that basically had a friend within the infectious disease center, and she basically had stock in like N95 masks, and it just saw had a rise, and they benefited from it. There was a lot of investigation into that. But Donald Trump basically threw away whatever left of any type of influence he had going into 2020. And yet he still got 74 million votes, which was stunning. So there was a lot of votes regarding it, his presidency. It just goes to show you that a lot of people basically didn't want Biden to win, but then wanted change and thought that Biden would be that change regarding the repressive policies under Trump that started with within him, and of course the disastrous foreign policy of Trump regarding Syria and Yemen, and the continuation of those policies of Obama and Bush. And what happened was in 2020, fascinating part about it was that Biden didn't do anything interesting, nothing. His campaign was very boring. He basically made a placating promise that, oh, I'll end the war in Yemen. I'll stop giving aid to Saudi Arabia. Oh, I'll basically won't shut down any businesses in during this pandemic. And went back on every policy as soon as he got in office, almost right away. And so a lot of those people basically are going to basically remember that. But, like I said, every 4 years, it seems that people get amnesia and basically forget that by the way, the Republicans will make it right if we just vote for Republican. And then when those policies don't, transpire to fruition next 4 years, we got to vote for somebody different. Or maybe this progressive will basically be the next big thing. And then the problems continue. And then, by the way, you don't have any more rights. You don't have any more civil liberties. Now, what do you have left? Nothing. And so you have nothing to forget, but everything to remember. And that it was your own ignorance regarding voting for these people to begin with. And, I think with the 2020 debacle, what's interesting, Kyle, into the 2016 election, we had the largest percentage of the non-voting bloc in history. That reversed in 2020, and we saw the largest amount of people voting in history. I don't know if you want to say there's a conspiracy about fictional votes, I wouldn't disagree, but I don't know for sure. But it just goes to show you that the two oldest presidents in history got two of the largest votes in history as well. Biden being the oldest and Donald Trump being the second oldest president in history.
Wow. Yeah, that is really interesting. Jesus. Yeah, it's going forward. I think Trump has kind of seen his time come and go. And, I think 2020 really was the year that he fell apart, because at the debates, he was like an unhinged dog. And don't get me wrong, it's really entertaining to watch Trump go after people just because he is funny. But at the same time, I think people saw that as like, oh, he's feeling it. He's really on the ropes. So these next couple of years are going to be really, really interesting. And I think it is going to be a sharp turn red. But I mean, we kind of expected the same thing out of the midterms, but it wasn't exactly that, which although when I saw the results, I wasn't exactly surprised. It does seem just like blue areas went more blue, red areas went more red. And that's because people just decided like what they were willing to tolerate. They weren't willing to tolerate COVID policies, so they went somewhere that didn't have them. And the people who liked them just stayed where they're at because they were happy. That's
we're still what the midterms did show was that we're still divided as a nation. So all we did was flip. We exchanged places. For an example, the Republicans went Senate and the House went to the Democrats. And so what's going to change? Nothing. I mean, until we have a competing party that threatens this narrative, I mean, it's still going to be Democrats, Republicans. Now, the Republicans, like I said before, Kyle, is that they have this division within itself. And if DeSantis wins outright, which I think he's going to, what will become of the Trumpers? Right? Will they create that third party, or will they acquiesce and say, you know what, we'll just be part of the DeSantis clan? I don't know, but I'm starting to see a worrying trend is that the Trumpers basically are so indignant and that they will create a party within themselves. And this is the reason why I think the Libertarians, you guys could have been that threat. But if this happens, and this is my fear, is that the Trumpers will create their own party and basically call it the Trump party because it's all centered on him, and that they will get a large amount of the votes. And if they win, and if they persuade the members of like the Democrats and Republicans to join them and basically say, hey, we want a real new world, a real government, a real, a change. This could be a big, big problem down the road. Of course, this is, a far-fetched idea I have, But it's a worrying trend I'm starting to see. It's a radical party. It's an extremist party, and it wouldn't be necessarily conservative. I think what it would be is a totalitarian, authoritarian type. So a mixture of the worst of the Democrats and Republicans all into one. And I think that's what the Trump party would be.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, I really think though that I think a lot of the Trumpers are going to say a third party can't win, so we're going to acquiesce behind DeSantis. And like this whole idea that the Republicans became anti-war just always seems so silly to me on its face, because everybody always says that, but it's like you realize these people would still say that we would like to turn the whole Middle East into a sheet of glass if we could. The same people who were thirsty for blood, the moment that the two towers went down and said that we need to go kill all Muslims, and we got to fight them over there so we don't fight them here. They're the same exact people, and I don't think that bloodlust on a large, population of the voting populace ever went away. I think they just shifted their focus over towards China, and you do see some of this in like this neo-McCarthyism almost, where there's some university professors who are Chinese that are being thrown in jail for being spies. They're calling TikTok digital fentanyl. We're being told that China's flooding our country, or flooding the Mexican market with fentanyl, even though they made fentanyl illegal in 2019 and punished people severely over there for making it. The TikTok stuff, I've talked about this ad nauseum on Twitter. All the private information from people on TikTok is stored on a server here in the US, but they never talk about how Israel has access to everybody's private information. That little detail gets left out. There's a lot of stuff about the China and the populist right rabbit hole, and I don't think that it's a sincere turn of being anti-war. I think it was just Trump said the stuff that some of the base wanted to hear, and they thought his talking points surrounding war sounded good, so they just adopted them. I don't think they had a sincere change of heart and think that Muslims are just a different group of people from the United States, which, they're just different culture. We don't understand their culture, and that's fine. We don't have to, but they're not a threat to Americans.
The anti-war Republicans remind me of people who say, well, I'm not going to be a thief, so I won't steal from Target, but I will steal from Walmart. And, it's really interesting to me that people like Matt Gaetz and, Lauren Boebert and that whole crew basically will adamantly oppose the Ukraine crisis, but they'll basically advocate very voicefully about a crisis in China or Iran. So you're not anti-war; you're just anti. You're more selective about who you want to go to war with and who you want to conflict with. Anti-war means anti-war. You're against war. We're against anyone at any time, anywhere. And basically you have to stick to your guns on that. Now, is every country going to be, peaceful country, whatnot? No, but you know what? Why can't we get more diplomats? And why can't we get unbiased or uninfluenced by political party advocates who basically speak on behalf and say, hey, listen, we can resolve this crisis. What does it entail? What are the problems? And that's what we need more of, not, military analysts in Pentagon basically trying to draw up plans for a 10-year, 20-year war with somebody, or how can we facilitate a coup and basically create a situation where a country can destroy itself. And that's what they're doing with Russia. The United States basically is not in Ukraine fighting against them, but they're facilitating, just like what they did with the Soviet Union in Afghanistan, by giving billions of dollars to through a proxy war, which will basically drain Russia in time. And so that's what's going to happen. And basically that's how they'll destroy Russia economically, through a long-standing 10. I don't know how many years that's going to be a conflict for. With Afghanistan was 10. But Ukraine, it could be 10, could be 20. But the longer it goes on, the worse off it is for Russia itself. Now, there's a lot of factors at play. I mean, we have, NATO expansionism, which is backed by the United States. You have U.S. military private industrialists who are making hand over fist by promoting, producing weapons like missiles and bullets that are going directly to God knows who, because the Pentagon basically said in a Bloomberg report that they didn't know where most of the weapons were being promoted to and given to, and who knows. Same thing with the Afghanistan-Soviet war. We knew where the weapons were going. They were going to the Mujahideen. Oh, by the way, they continued that jihad into the United States, which gave us, a prime facial conflict of the next 15, 20 years. And basically, that war was the war of terrorism. And by the way, there's no timetable on that, which is an ingenious idea. It's a war against an ideology, not against a country or a name, which is unbelievable. In fact, in 1999, the CIA said we're going to war with Al Qaeda. Basically, this ragtag group. By the way, they're not a country. They're not a military, army or whatnot. They're, ragtag group of people that basically were funded by Osama bin Laden. Bin Laden's dead now. So is Dr. Ayman al-Zawahiri. So is just about every other high-ranking Al Qaeda leader that's in Guantanamo Bay or killed. Well, now we need a new war. Now we currently are facilitating conflicts in Yemen and Ukraine, but we need a real war. A war where the United States can basically intervene and get, the generals pleasing at the, the ghoulish generals in the Pentagon pleased. And of course, the private military industrialists. So, I mean, it's when was the last time we intervened in a country? Well, it's been a while. I mean, Syria, we were invited. Well, it's Iraq, 2003. And so what we need now is a new intervention. And every 20 years, it's historical. Every 15, 20 years, the United States intervenes militarily in a country. Well, we're long overdue.
Damning to think about.
Yes.
Yeah. Oof.
And even, by the way, Iran would be a tremendous, the reason why we haven't invaded Iran. I've interviewed Lawrence Wilkerson, who was an assistant to the Secretary of State, Colin Powell, under the Bush administration. And he's basically told me that the reason why they haven't invaded Iran was because the United States generals at the Pentagon saw Iran as a very formidable adversary. And it's not like Iraq, where we starved them on the oil for food program in 1990, where basically half the country was under, the poverty level. We can easily just go in there and destroy them. Iran is a very stable country economically. Now, yes, they've been, there's a civil war, so to speak, or protests against the ghoulish mullahs of the country. But as a whole, the Persians are a fighting force, generational, unlike the Arabs. The Arabs are basically not very good fighters. Persians and Shias are absolutely amazing fighters, generations of fighters, and in them. And Iran basically is a very stable country, very military capable country, and the Pentagon knows that. And so Wilkerson basically said, when Obama took office, that if he does engage with Israel and talks with King Salman regarding an invasion of Iran, the Pentagon generals would authorize a walkout and would not entertain, because they saw that any type of invasion would lead to tens of thousands, if not over 100,000 U.S. military deaths in the first year. And so if this war were to fruition, Kyle, it would be an unmitigated disaster. Would DeSantis make that bold, something that Bush, something that Obama, something that Biden and Trump didn't do? Would DeSantis acquiesce and say, yes, let's go? I think he would.
I think he would too. It's damning to think about. And I don't think a lot of people are considering the real ramifications of a DeSantis presidency, because it can get pretty ugly. Adam, we've been going for almost 2 hours. I've enjoyed every second of this. You're a wealth of you're a wealth of knowledge. I'm I'm very glad that you share the same skepticism and frustration of alternate media and alternative news sources that I do, because you, much like myself, just want to put the truth out there and want to arm people with information to make a change in their lives and in the way that we view the situations going all over the world. So do your plugs and we'll close her out.
Yeah, no, I'm easy to find. My name is Adam Fitzgerald, and I use my real name to everything I post and share with people, because I want people to know that it's coming from a real person. And yes, Kyle, hey, listen, my goal is, to share information, the truth about as much as I can about the events of September 11, 2001. But I'm also an anti-war type. And, I see the ramifications of what war can do. It could destroy not just, the perceived enemy, but it destroys our soul, our personality within. I'm atheist. I don't believe in God or the devil, but I do believe that, we do share a common spiritual nature with each other. And what war does is basically replace conversation with conflict. And with conflict comes death and destruction and disease and famine and poverty. And it's something that the influence of the affluent people want. And it's something that they can't understand about the commonality of the people, because they don't share commonality with us. But as long as we're divided, and as long as we're misinformed, and as long as we consider ourselves the enemy, I'm going to speak out as much as I can and do what little I can. I'm not an expert. I'm just an independent investigator trying to share unbiased information with the people, because I believe that with information and education, we can actually threaten the establishment and make a real change that we desperately need now, before it's much too late. And as with each passing day, each passing second, that we are, this inherently divided and wanting and needing and basically dependent on the institution that did this to us, we're heading into a future of disaster. And so, thank you very much for having me. I really much enjoy your show and talking with you. And my name is Adam Fitzgerald. Just Google Adam Fitzgerald 9/11. I come right in.
Awesome, Adam. Well, it's been a very enlightening conversation. I'm sure everyone else will enjoy it too. Everybody, make sure you like, subscribe, and share. I should always do it at the beginning of the show, but I'm absolutely horrible at that. So, Adam, if you don't got anything else, if you want anything else, we'll close her out. Thanks, Adam.
Yeah.